Hi, everyone. I'm just going to wait a couple minutes before starting the event for the rest of the people to trickle in. Okay, everyone, just to kick things off, just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Mashal, and I'm excited to welcome you to our webinar on closing the say-do gap in the fashion industry. Joining us today are panelists who have expertise and insights into this topic from the brand and consumer angles. During the discussion, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them out on the right-hand side in the questions box, and we'll get to them towards the end of the discussion. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. So just a little bit about Green Story. Our vision is to enable every consumer to ask themselves, what's my impact before they make a purchase? As a company, we work with brands from startups to global giants to measure the impact of their supply chains, visualize it for customers, and then offset the unavoidable emissions too. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator today. Lara is a strategic marketing and innovation consultant working at the intersection of technology, sustainability, and fashion, with a deep understanding of what makes people buy and over a decade of international experience. Lara collaborates with innovators and brands on a mission to change the future of fashion. She's also a startup mentor at Fashion for Good Accelerator and the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Over to you, Lara.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for the introduction, and happy Earth Day to everyone. I wanted to also thank you, Green Story, for giving such a great opportunity to talk about conscious consumerism and for such a great panel of experts and founders. Before we get started with the question, I'm going to give all the panelists a chance to quickly introduce themselves. Jacqueline, do you want to get started?
Sure, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm Jacqueline. I'm based out of Toronto. So first and foremost, I'm a wardrobe stylist. So I help everyday people find joy, simplicity, and confidence through their clothes, and very much bring a sustainability lens into the work I do. And then actually recently I launched a company called Shopwise, which is a one-stop shop for sustainable fashion in efforts to make sustainability more accessible to people. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Livy, over to you.
Hi, so I'm Livy Drake. I'm a sustainability and behaviour change consultant, and I work with organisations to understand how to deliver behaviour change around sustainability issues, so connecting what drives our actions from the social issues, the psychological issues, and the structural issues around us.
Fantastic. Jacob, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Jacob Dvorsky. I'm one of the co-founders of Asket. In short, we're a Swedish menswear brand on a mission to end the era of fast consumption and slow down the pace of fashion. In its essence, we do that by introducing a permanent collection of very mindfully produced garments, high quality, timeless pieces, and selling them in a radically transparent way. What we hope is by doing that, we can restore the value of garments and get our customers to join in on what we call the pursuit of less. So I'm very excited to be on the panel today and discuss more on sustainable consumption.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining. Before we get started to talk about this gap between what people say and what actually do when it comes to sustainable fashion, I just wanted to get an understanding from you all on what you think that be a sustainable fashion consumer actually means today. over to you all. Jacqueline, do you want to get started?
Maybe I'll get started. Yeah, I think traditionally most people think that the first thing you always have to do is buy, and like shop a lot of new things, which, you know, in turn, if you have the ability to make more sustainable choices through your shopping habits, I think that's great. But I very much see the whole concept of incorporating sustainability into our purchasing behavior as starting with the why, and like asking questions before you purchase, and just having that kind of mindfulness when you're building your wardrobe, when you're investing in pieces, and just asking those questions before, and not necessarily always just thinking that the only way to do it is through your purchasing habits, even though that can be a really great way to be more sustainable, I would say. So it's definitely like a complex space, and there's not just one way to do it.
Livy.
So I think what does being a sustainable fashion consumer mean is about thinking, and we'll talk a bit more about whether people do think or don't think, but understanding why people are shopping, what the motivations are, what's the need behind a purchase, and thinking about what you're trying to satisfy when you go to spend your money, and then thinking about how that money is going to influence the world.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I can jump in. So I mean, we always talk about how we don't believe that you can shop your way to sustainability. So in a way, that's, you know, being a sustainable consumer might be about not being a consumer in the word's basic sense. That, like, very simple for us, is the main problem with fashion is the pure mass of garments produced and sold. So the best thing first is to buy less things, and then it's, of course, when you buy something, buy better things, research, make conscious choices, and finally make the stuff you buy last, take care of them, mend them when they're broken, and once you can't wear them anymore, try to donate them, or at least bring them to a place where they can be recycled or restored. So that's
thank you all for sharing this.
Can I
Sorry,
just
Jacqueline.
contribute one more thing? I have a thought that came off of Jacob's point, is even through my styling work, like a lot of the time, like traditionally we actually only wear about the same 30% of the clothes in our wardrobe, which is kind of mind-boggling to think. But so a concept I use a lot with my styling work is to shop your closet. And so instead of necessarily going to buy something new, going to that 70% in your wardrobe and seeing what you can utilize there. And then that way, with that whole kind of mentality of using what you already have, you typically can have potentially a higher disposable income to shop better and shop smarter, as Jacob was saying, to kind of invest in like better quality pieces as well. So definitely the whole conversation of mindfulness, and definitely shopping your closet if that's something someone's open to.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think that there are so many different options, right, to so many different ways to be a sustainable fashion consumer today. How do you all explain, and I'd like to start with Livy, and then get into Jacqueline and Jacob from really actually a brand perspective, but really starting with the consumer. Why do you think that there's such a gap between what people say? So more than 80% says that they're willing to shop sustainably, and only 10% actually go ahead with that. Where do you think that, you know, the disparity, the gap comes from a consumer perspective, and then Jacob from a brand perspective?
Well, there's lots around what we say we think we'll do with our rational head. So there's two parts of our thinking. Put simply, they call it system 1 and system 2. And system 2 is the bit that's very logical. It says, oh, shall I do this or shall I do that? And when you're asked a question by somebody, what would you do in this situation? Well, yes, rationally I do this. But in the moment, when the offer comes up and the discount and the flash sale and the had a rubbish day, been sat in a room for weeks on end, not seeing any friends. Oh, I want to make myself feel better. I know, I'll buy something. And the dopamine rush of buying something kicks in, and and there's another thing. So it's very much the difference between the two parts of our brains and how we would like to act and actually how we act in the moment. And shopping has a massive, especially fast fashion, has a massive dopamine hit. And we're pretty addicted to dopamine as human beings. So that'll be why.
Jacqueline, do you have anything to add from this, really from a consumer perspective?
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, Livy, and I agree. Like, we're kind of addicted to that dopamine feeling, but I kind of think, like, how else can we experience those feelings without necessarily buying fast fashion? So it goes even to, like, you know, trying a new outfit on, wearing something differently, supporting a sustainable brand instead, swapping clothes with other people instead of going to the fast fashion shop. So kind of exploring other ways to get that dopamine hit. And then I also find, like, I recommend people to just completely unsubscribe from any brand that gives you those, like, intense deals all the time that don't really meet the sustainability and ethics values. Because if you're not being bothered and marketed all the time about these ads, it's easier to say no. Because I get it, it's totally addicting, and they do that because they know it works, right? So yeah, just thinking of other ways you can kind of receive that dopamine feeling as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Jacob, before I get to you, I just wanted to welcome Andrea on stage. He had some technical difficulty. Ciao, hello. Andrea is the founder of Highend. Do you want to take a couple of seconds to introduce yourself and talk about Highend?
But first, I'm sorry about this inconvenience with Chrome, but I guess Chrome doesn't really much. I'm here with my cell phone. So anyway, no, I don't know if you heard about Myar. It's a brand that does upcycling. As I take whatever is in the market of second-hand military garments and give a second life. So with this cut and sew approach, sartorial approach, we try to give a second life, but we try also to give back what was something from the past with a different aesthetic and a different angle also on the way that you wear it into a more civil use. So I love to work with the product. I come from the more, let's say, fashion background in terms of customization and things like this. So with Myar, we experience a lot the upcycling approach, giving all we can to be as sustainable as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We were just talking about the disparity between what people say and do when it really comes to shopping sustainably. We just got that consumer perspective from both Livy and Jacqueline, and I'm interested in the brand perspective. So specifically, which factors do you look at as a brand when looking to convince more consumers to shop sustainably? Does it come to cost, to sizing? What is it? So Jacob, can you tell us about your experience at ASCAD?
Absolutely. So I think one important part to keep in mind is that, I mean, the way this gap is phrased is kind of all else equal. Would you want to shop more sustainably? Yes. But in fashion, you're always going to compete on a lot of other parameters as well. And what we've found is that you really have to be just as good as the other brands on the same parameters in terms of style and quality and price points. And then you can be sustainable as like an upside to that. And then maybe if that is equal, you can get people to cross that gap. But it's, I think, very few that would buy something, a fashion item or a garment, just because it's sustainable. But here the industry is catching up. If we look 10 years ago, sustainability in fashion was not very sexy. It was not, a buzzword, but now more and more are moving in there, and you can see that you actually can make garments that are on par with everything else, but also have the sustainability angle to it. So I think that's an important part, and something where we really tried, we still market our products mainly from a desire perspective, and then bundle in the sustainability aspects as kind of layers as you get to know them. Then another point to this, I think, is that it is extremely hard to know what it means to shop sustainably. it's kind of overwhelming. And even for if you're in the industry and you know a lot about it, it can still be hard to judge, you know, what is this material? What's the end of life scenario here? And there's a lot of also greenwashing going around that kind of muddies the waters on that too. So I think there, you know, that is definitely one part of it as well, and that it's an overwhelming task for a consumer. And then maybe you're just like, okay, forget about it. Everything seems, you know, either equal or just everything is bad. I'll buy the cheapest or the nicest. And that's where we really try to put all the cards in the hands of the customer, put everything out there so that they can make a conscious decision, because in most shops you don't even have the tools to do that.
Yeah, Andrea, I think this ties very well into what you're doing with Maya and your vision about sustainability and you know, how to talk to consumers. So would you like to share your perspective?
I think it's a choice of the consumer to spend a certain amount of money for whatever they feel it's important for them to buy. So if they spend 200 euro, or if they spend 100 euro, or if they spend 10 euro, it's the choices of, you know, it's their choices of being confident with what they can afford, but also with what they believe it's good to spend those money for. So the fact that it's true that the cost is a big issue also in the world of, let's say, sustainability, but it's true also that I stand work behind storytelling, narrative, romanticism, visual. It's an important factor that you know, make you involved the team of the marketing, maybe the visual team, maybe also the sales team. So you need to narrate the story as the best as you can to convince your consumer why that product is a certain amount. Of course, that the marginality, it's a key issue for every company, because you need to protect your marginality to cover your cost, and that's something that everybody should do, of course. But it's also true that the perception value of the product that you sell needs to be, whether it is cheap or expensive, needs to be having that narrative and truth to what people read about, you know. So because the more you're good to tell the story and why you're good to tell the story, the more the people believe you and the more the people will follow you, you know. So it doesn't matter how big you are, actually. It matters how deep you are, in a sense of profound message that you give to your consumers.
Yeah, I love this point that were just made by all of you, and I want to talk about the roles that actually brand are playing in terms of leading consumers to more sustainable decisions and purchases. So, and I want to tap into both the marketing side that Andrea and Jacob just you know, mentioned about storytelling and authenticity and value and brand values, but also really from a perspective of technology, how do we bring a more transparency to also support the marketing messaging? So feel free to jump in with, you know, anything that you'd like to share.
Yeah, or I'll jump in shortly just to fill in on what Andrea said. I mean, storytelling is a super valuable tool in emphasizing the value of sustainability and the way the products are made. It's something for us. We started with our transparency journey mainly as a way to actually show people the quality of our garments, because we're an online brand and we had to manifest high quality garments even if we charge a slightly lower premium on them, which you normally use as a quality indicator, the price. And then we figured, you know, well, for one, we can put our costs out there and explain how, you know, you're paying this much for a garment that would otherwise cost this. But then we also figured that we can, you know, we'll show the factories because they're made in high-end factories. So in the beginning, that was really a way to manifest the quality and in that sense, raise the value that someone would be willing to pay for it. But then it turned, as it's progressed for us, it's also become a way to bring, you know, meaning back into garments and understanding of the work and resources that go into them, so that you in the end appreciate and take care of them in a way you wouldn't otherwise, and turn them from a consumable to an investment, and in the end will make you consume less, hopefully.
I'm just going to jump in a bit about the sort of the behavioral psychology around that, because it's really interesting, because the technology has made has devalued so many things. So being online, suddenly things are 2D and people don't understand the quality because they can't feel it. But people pay for effort. So people don't like effort, and if things are hard work, they don't do them, which is where technology has made and Instagram and all these things have made things so much more instantaneous, that then people are very lazy, so they don't want to go and do things, and they don't want to repair their clothes and all these things, but people will pay for effort. So if like Jacob's saying, he's putting all of those, how it's made, who's made it, the time that's gone into it, the people, suddenly this product has value again, because that perception of value is based on something that someone can see because they can't feel it.
Jacqueline, anything to add on this?
Yeah, I think like it's very interesting, like the say-do gap being so large between like the 10% to 80%. And I definitely agree with the whole storytelling and communicating a good quality product first, because at the end of the day, people shop with emotion. Like we purchase anything with emotion. So I'm sure Livy can speak to that too. But yeah, so I feel like because there's such an emotional connection to our purchasing, at the end of the day, it has to come down to as well, like a good quality product that people will want to wear and keep and take care of. But I think at the same time as well, I don't necessarily have data to like necessarily explain this, but it's very much my own personal experience working with clients, is that the customer journey to purchase sustainable clothing is different than a fast fashion shopper. So I find it's very much a longer journey, and it's a different journey of resonating with those products, thinking about the decision before they buy, and then also the whole accessibility from a price point perspective. I think as well, like sustainability from a price point is not always accessible to everyone. So for sometimes that conversion rate might take longer, or more of a decision factor rather than how quickly the say-do gap is for like a fast fashion brand, right? So there's a lot more factors there, from emotional to price point accessibility, and just experience as well. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
The whole price point thing is also huge. So there's something called anchoring. So the price we see first will anchor how much we're prepared to pay. So they've done a study in the US where that people wrote down the last 3 digits of their social security number, and then they asked them to go and buy something. I think they bid in an auction, and based on how high someone's social security number was, but well, they're basically what they bid on an item that had nothing to do with their social security number was based on this number they'd seen first. So if the first number that someone sees when they go shopping is, $3.99, and then they look at something that's $199, their frame of reference is, it's wrong. Whereas if they start off and it's $599 and suddenly something's $199, this thing's suddenly good value.
That's
and it's not logical.
Wow.
Yeah, that's very interesting and curious. And thanks for sharing this example. And then I'm also curious on your side. We're talking about storytelling, but obviously there are so many different formats to talk about it. And you mentioned also to do this in a deep way, with authenticity. Do you want to share your experience with your brand?
About the storytelling you're saying?
Yeah, like different format of doing this. So what other marketing tools, and really in terms of how do you stay authentic?
But first I would like to insert on the quality of online, because that's another topics are really very interested. What's a really good quality of online, and what's a really deep quality of online? Because the experience of online, it's very cold. But if you make that warm somehow, maybe that can become an amazing tools for selling as well, you know, because I can tell you already that if your screen is a more cold color than a warm color than pastel color, you have 3 different types of consumer that wants to buy that type of garment, you know. So, and I understand that the sensorial part is something that probably in the future we will arrive, but it will be very interesting also what's the behavior of the consumer that is willing to buy something that is more sustainable rather than something that is not, you know. So to pay that more price, if that can be the issue, for an experience that also can have online. So I think this could be a very nice topic to enter, because I like that approach too. So I think, answering to you, Lara, the way that you communicate, the way that you show a photo of a t-shirt, of a sweatshirt, of a shirt, whatever you can think of, needs to have sort of an attraction, almost a romanticism to attract you. But after, you have to go deep. And to be deep, what does it mean in an online format? How can you be so deep in an online format? You can use music, you can use sounds, you can use the right copy, you can make a copy bigger, copy smaller. It really depends. You can make it a copy maybe in a capital font or maybe in a cursive font. That's a narrative, a way of expressing your product, you know, because everything that you do, every aesthetic things that you do, whether is even the price tag that you put, it should have that aesthetic of your brand, you know, that redefine your brand. So answering to you, Lara, I think it's important very well to study this. And actually, I would love to know more about this, especially from a psychological point of view, what the consumer wants to see and why they want to see that, you know, and also the education of the consumer, because if the consumer is not educated, then probably you don't need to do so much. But if the consumer is very well educated, then you need to stand for the education that there is around about sustainability. So somehow, for me, for what regards my art, we are trying to say whatever we can from a transparent point of view, and also on the making of the product, to show how difficult it is to do certain stuff, not how easy it is to do, you know, because if you make it yourself at home and you say, wow, you know what, I'd rather go buy it, I spend less time of my life, maybe that's good, you know. But if you make a product that is very easy to do and everybody can do, then it's not good, or you need another narrative to say why is good your product, or a different price range to convince the consumer to go back to your product. So I think really the point here to talk about is what your brand stands for, how your brand is, which aesthetic, and to find the best way to convince your consumer to fall in love with you.
So I'm just going to say, consumers don't know what they want and they don't know things. So there was a funny study was done about beds, and they had a cheap bed and a quality bed, and they had the same background on the advert, on the internet adverts. And so the first time the cheap bed sold, because it was based on price and the backgrounds are the same. And then they had the same beds, one was expensive, one was cheap. The expensive one had a backdrop of clouds behind it, so it looked all dreamy. People bought the one with the dreamy background, and it was more expensive.
Wow.
This is the psychology bit. So
yeah.
how things are presented and how they're framed, and you know what people see when they're buying in that experience. Also, people, if they showed videos of old people and then they're asked to walk down the street, they walk slower. This is the psychology we're dealing with. So, you know, what's going on around that person, what they're seeing is really, really key.
That's so interesting. And it all comes down to actually the dream that you're selling and the vision that you're selling rather than the product, right? And connect with that dream and that vision that the consumer has. Because I feel that most of the times the sustainability can be perceived as very cold. Going back to what Andrea was saying, how do you actually add those values that have always been typical of, the fashion industry into selling a dream, selling a lifestyle rather than just selling an impact on people and planet. So coming down to that, where do you think that the responsibility, this is for everyone, where do you think that the responsibility sits? We obviously had two founders of two brands. Where do you feel that your responsibility is in terms of educating and making an impact? And really from the consumer perspective, how much should consumers actually educate themselves and go out of their ways to learn more about their impact? Jacqueline, I'm gonna get started with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's everyone, to be honest. I think everyone needs to be involved. I think the way society puts pressure on individuals that it's mainly their responsibility is not fair, to be honest, to the individual. And I do think, I mean, we have, I guess, the responsibility to do the best we can, but I think a lot of the education and policy levels and creating change and actually seeing a difference into like our climate crisis and everything, I think it really does have to come from global corporations, policy leaders, governments, and it's more so we all have to work together to kind of make our industry more sustainable. So I do think the consumer can do the best that they can, and grace, and have a bit of respect for themselves that they don't have to take on that whole thing, this whole kind of challenge alone. But at the same time, as an individual, myself as well, like I really try to hold brands accountable, and especially as there's so many fashion brands that already exist pre-sustainability and everything. I think we can also try our best to encourage them to make those swaps and to shift towards a more sustainable industry, while also really spending and voting with our dollar towards brands that are kind of taking the leaders, like Jacob and Andrea today. Definitely voting with our dollar where we have the ability to do so.
Yeah,
I would just jump in quickly and say the way that we'll achieve the biggest behavior change is around structural changes, so making the defaults the green solution. So how do we then, and that would involve policy and structural changes within the industry, so it's not people are competing, everyone has to have certain standards, so actually you can't make cheap garments anymore.
Agreed. Definitely a whole structural change would be really beneficial.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm wondering from a brand perspective, where do you think that your sustainability responsibility is, Andrea?
But anyway, it's in all of us, like Jacqueline was saying. I think the way that I see it for me is always regard the education that the consumer has, and if the system, because if I learn something and I'm educated, then the system needs to be prepared for my education. But if the system is not ready for the education that I've been learning, then there is there is a gap within the business that you want to create. So I think that today the education start to be pretty. It's not that it's there, but it start to be pretty good. Even in school with kids, it's amazing how smart they are today, and how much they know, and how much they want things, and they're very precise on what they want. But it's also true that it's not clear yet the typology of responsible approach that everybody wants to have. So I think that a company, for instance, like Mayar, needs to tell whatever it can to the truth of what's behind. And the more truth you say, the more it's easy for Mayar to live. Because you know why? Because military garment existed already in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. And when there was a surplus, army surplus was already there. So there is no new on the garment. The new thing is just how you make those garments live back again. But in terms of a product, the cotton is the same, the wool is the same, the color, the camouflage, the weight of the fabric is always part of the past, always existed. It's something that maybe your eyes have been seeing so many times. So in terms of education, what it needs to be doing, it's that the new level, the second life level of approach needs to be very cleverly understood from the consumer. And this is going to be taking some time to explain it. And I agree that we are kind of slow to know that. But the more time it passes and the more the system is getting ready to ask you a question, not to ask you a question, not to think that they know already, you know. So because they are prepared, people start to be very prepared. So I don't know if I confuse for what I was saying, but I think, in my opinion, it's the level of education is starting to grow and grow even more. So in the future, so we have to be ready to accept any type of question and give any types of explanation, because that's the beauty of giving the truth, transparent part of your product or your story.
Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately as a brand, I believe the responsibility, or I want to believe that we should take a very large responsibility, and we're trying to do that, and extending that beyond the point of purchase, but through the whole lifetime of a garment. But still, I think it's we're doing that because that stems from our personal beliefs, but most brands are corporations, and they don't this is not something you have to adhere to, and most corporations actually have growth goals and profit goals that they have to obtain. So you can wonder, will that ever align? Because right now it's voluntary. So I don't think saying that it's the brand's responsibility and that they're just going to assume that is not going to work. So either then it has to come from the consumer side, but I don't think that's fair, and I don't think we can expect that to be driven, because they also only have the choices available to them to drive it from. So I agree with both Jacqueline and Livy. In the end, I think for the kind of change that is needed and at the pace that it's needed, regulation and leveling the playing field so that all externalities and the true cost of garments are leveled is probably needed. Otherwise, it's very tricky, but it is interrelated. Like, we as a brand can push, and our movement can be supported by the interests of the consumers. I mean, we wouldn't be where we are if there weren't conscious consumers making those choices right now, but it's still a very niche part of the industry. So yeah, that's a mixed response. Ultimately, I feel that it's regulation that's needed, but at the same time, I feel the moral responsibility is on the brands.
Yeah. Thank you all for sharing. We're talking a lot about responsibility. We're talking about trust, and we're talking about transparency. And marketing is definitely, and communications in general is definitely one way of doing that. But we also know that consumers don't really trust brands in general. I was reading yesterday on this new report from Zalando that is actually on the gap between what people say and do, how also influencers are not trusted. So how do you get them to talk about sustainability? So the other option is around technology. Anyone wants to share any perspective in the kind of tools and how brands can actually leverage technology and data to communicate to consumers the transparency and their sustainability efforts? Who would like to share?
Well, I'll just give 2 cents, but essentially I find what Green Story is doing is really awesome. Like, even having that AI component to incorporate like stats and understand the impact of garments. I think that's a great example of how AI can be incorporated into the whole like experience customer journey for consumers and for brands to communicate that transparency as well. So yeah, I think that's one great example.
Yeah, no, I think there are so many promising technologies out there for helping what we talked about before about communicating and storytelling. I mean, there's also a lot where you're going to get into how do we verify these and create trust with the consumer. So now there are technologies where you can trace cotton down to the farm via DNA sampling. All of those technologies, if they can go more mainstream and become part of the traceability journey, for sure. Impact calculations, I know now, just the other day, I think Klarna, which is a big payment method here in Sweden at least, they incorporated a CO2 calculator into their app so that it will calculate the CO2 emissions of your consumption. Things like that will help people actually become aware of their choices and get, if you get data on things, it will become a lot easier for yourself as a consumer to also set targets on reduction and maybe limit yourself because you see that there is a real impact behind it.
I would like to also talk about something that's happening already, and it's not so high tech, but the whole hire model of clothing, which is now gaining traction. So people can hire brands. They have a wardrobe. I think it's Devout is one that's maybe in the UK or in Europe. I'm not sure. It's in North America. But you have clothes for a month. You wear them. You don't even need to wash them. Send them back and then get some more. So you get all the buzz and all the excitement of the new clothes, and you can buy or you can hire or experience quite high end. Well, you can experience sustainable brands. So it's not fast fashion. So it's taking the sort of swap shop model or the thrift store or the secondhand shop experience of having things that have been worn once, or the higher model, and using it for clothing. And also, I think is it Mud Jeans and others are doing you pay in installments. So again, you get the experience of paying less money and you pay over time. So that's all leveraging kind of technology. I think someone in the chat actually asked about some of the payment provider options where actually you pay in installments, and whether that's encouraging more consumerism or whether it's making people buy better. And I guess it depends on who's using that technology. So if the sustainable brands aren't playing that game, but all the fast fashion ones are, then people will go to where they can spend, less money and have it spread out.
Fantastic. Andrea, do you have anything to share?
In terms of technology, I believe a lot in chemistry and engineering, especially So I think that the evolution of product that request a big chain of production, like cotton or like wool, also polyester and nylon, synthetic fiber. I think the evolution, the innovation of those techniques and consumption of water, consumption of chemistry, chemical consumption also of time for the machine to run, it's now it's getting less and less. And the way that are becoming less is through mechanics or through chemistry. So I love the fact that a raw material, the idea of the raw material, it's not like we used to think back in the days, but now the raw material is having an importance that before it didn't have. So I believe a lot in those type of technology. Of course, it's not so digital, but today there are machines that can calculate the emission also, and the consumption, and the time, of course, of making fabric or product, like or fibers. So I think that. And also like a washing machine that are able to calculate the typology of ingredient that you put there, so the chemistry, and also the amount of water consumption, and of course the energy consumption. So for me, the innovation in this field, it's amazing. It's also on the recycling field, there is a huge world that you can open a new chapter there. But I believe a lot on those types of innovations. So I'm always put an eye on it. Whether I use the plastic bag, whether I use the threads, whether I use a printing pigment, I need to know exactly what type of material I'm using and what type of material I have in terms of availability from the supplier to have those types of sustainable certification or approach. So for me, innovation today is a big market, is a very nice market. And I think the people, though, that buy this product should be informed by the brand, but especially today, we don't need to hide the supplier anymore. We can embrace the supplier with you, with the brand, and talk the same language together with the final consumer. So I think this can be a good evolution on the education on the final consumer.
Yeah, that's definitely my experience. It's something that we're seeing manufacturers finally having a voice and also being chosen by the brands based on their sustainability mission. That's becoming important too. So it's very nice to see what's happening in the industry where all the players are actually, getting together to change the industry. But we're just 10 minutes to go, and I'm gonna go towards through the Q&A, to the questions from the audience. But I wanted to ask you all a question before doing so. We talk a lot about the complexity of sustainability in fashion. Consumers don't know what to buy, so which brands to choose. So I'd like to hear from all of you, the kind of brands that you really like, apart from your own, in this case of Andrea and Jacob. You're not allowed to mention Asket or Maillard. But really I would love for you to share the sustainable brands that you love and that you think that are doing a really, really good job in terms of communication and transparency, and that's why you buy them. Jacqueline, I saw you laughing, so you go first.
Yeah, sure. No, I love this. It just in turn, like myself, I have like a library of brands that I turn to and share with my clients, and that's essentially why I even launched Shopwise, is because I myself have this passion to research all these brands that are awesome, but not everyone wants to put in that research and effort to find them themselves. So that's essentially why I created Shopwise. But some brands off the top of my head that I really love, like especially in Canada, there's the Good Tea, which they do kind of a fair trade and organic t-shirts and basics, and the reason, for example, like when I look for a brand to shop from and I kind of want to vet them to see if they meet my personal values, I very much look on like if they have any certifications, if they are transparent about their factories and suppliers, and then also what the materials are made from. As well, in a world where there's so much greenwashing nowadays, especially because sustainability has become a buzzword, all these brands that are using sustainability or having like eco lines when they're really not very environmentally friendly, slash still have unethical production supply chains, it can be very overwhelming. So I'd say some brands off the top of my head to answer your question is the Good Tea. Also another Toronto brand is Tamga. They do really beautiful dresses and fun prints. But yeah, essentially what I look for is their supply chain transparency, the quality of their fabrics and products, and then also if they have any certifications.
Thank you. Libby, how about you?
So I'm a kind of reuse and reduce kind of person. So I generally, most of my clothes are actually my sister's hand-me-downs, and my sister's 6 years younger than me. And actually during lockdown, I've been making things. So I found fabric that I've had from 10 years ago, and I've been sat in the evenings. My Saturday nights, I've made 4 dresses now during lockdown. So I'm kind of a bit old school in that sense. And then if I do buy things, then there's a couple of companies in the UK called Rapa Nui, who are an ethical t-shirt brand, and they've got the story on their website, so you can see their where their cotton comes from. You can see their factory, and they're very transparent. So they tell that stories, which you've alluded to earlier. So, but I am really tempted by those jeans now with the payment plan. So I was like, oh, I just love the principle of it. So I'm kind of it pops up now every now and again. I'm like, oh yeah, but
which one is it?
I think it's mud. I think it is.
Oh, mud jeans. Okay.
But the thought of not being able to try on a pair of jeans, that's the bit that confuses me, because it's not easy to find a pair of jeans. So.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. How about you?
I'm gonna go maybe boring and expected, a brand that comes up in these all the time, but I am super impressed by Patagonia and their work. So it's a no-brainer, but I think, everything from the backstory to their company philosophy, and it really feels like they're living their values. They're even, taking quite extreme measures, and they're very environmentally, into all the environmental causes, supporting that. I think they're covering a lot, and it's cool to see such a big brand that can still do that, because there are so many smaller brands I could have also mentioned that are doing great work, but I think they are pushing the needle and really driving a lot of the consumer interest in this. Then I think Allbirds, also very inspiring in terms of how they communicate it, and how they're now, I think they just released their carbon calculator for everyone to use, which I also thought was amazing. So yeah, those two I would say.
Thanks.
But
Andrea,
you already mentioned a really good one, Patagonia, which is definitely one of my top lists for sure. But also mud jeans. Why did you mention Patagonia mud jeans? Because they're good to say whatever they do, and it's very transparent, and it's so easy to be loyal to them, because they'll be loyal to you. So I think other brands should have the same types of transparent approach, or the same way of narrate what you believe, and after you find the consumer that wants to believe you. I know that even if my eye is very small, microscopic, but I believe a lot in this, because once someone fell in love with you and continue to fall in love, it means that it's forever after, because it means that you touch a point of a personal point of any consumer that is sensible to this type of subject, whatever subject you think is good to narrate. So I also have one personal favorite is Bode. Bode is from New York, and they do a very good job on artisanal, sartorial craftsmanship, on either on product like clothing, but also on accessories. So I think they're very, very good. And the fact that they have a romanticism around that is very interesting makes me want to even go there and buy the product. It's actually very, very expensive, this product, but it's a reason why you want to buy, is because they narrate very well. So no, I think brands, there are a lot of others in the world, but I think definitely Mud and Patagonia are one of the best for sure.
I'm just gonna add one from my list, that is Pagaya, that I love what they do really in terms of communication and marketing, and really bringing material science into marketing and the consumer world. But thank you for sharing all your top list. There's one question that there's not a lot of time, but there's one question that I really want to ask, and this comes from Kim, and she's asking about policy change. And I'm interested in hearing the perspective that you guys have on how we can push the needle on policy change. I agree the amount of change required for the industry needs to be structural. This problem seems so big. So what can we do today or in the immediate to start advocating for structural changes locally and even globally?
Maybe I'll start. I think like in order to kind of push the needle, I think, it does require us to put in a bit of effort as individuals. And we're actually in the middle of Fashion Revolution Week, which I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with. I'm sure everyone here is on the panel, but essentially it's a reminder for people to demand more transparency and a more fair fashion industry. And so now is a great time if someone is looking to kind of help push the needle. There's so many resources out there of how you can kind of get involved. But something that I do is, like, I definitely email a lot of brands asking for them to be more transparent and share more info on their supply chains. But I think it also can be as simple as just voting. Like, when you vote, you're voting for the kind of world you believe in, and it could be as simple as that, but we have to do it collectively in a way. But I definitely am curious to everyone else's answers, because I agree with Kim's perspective, is that it is really overwhelming and it is kind of scary, but we do need to kind of have some sort of change at a faster pace as well. So I'm excited to hear what everyone else suggests.
Who would like to jump in?
To be honest, I really don't have a good answer to that.
Me too.
I've been too caught up in building my own brand as a response to this that I've never really thought of how to engage in the politics of it. And it does seem immense in the way that it's, I live in Sweden. Even what I vote for here is not going to have a large effect on these global supply chains. So it is tricky, but I would assume that going in for different interest groups and advocating in those, signing up for various petitions, depending on which particular topic you want to see change within. I mean, there's the first kind of political engagement we've done as a brand or are going to do is something in the US where they're trying to bring back or strengthening laws around greenwashing and having a more common vocabulary for how you can market sustainable products and such. So there are things you can do. Maybe that is, not just general voting, but honestly, I'm not an expert in this field.
Yeah,
I think I would just add the advocacy, and where there are organisations who are doing things around human rights, and there was lots after the Rana Plaza incident, and so Fashion Revolution, and I'm trying to think, there's another one, I can't think what they're called now, who really works for human rights issues, and there's lots of people working with cotton farmers and things, and the organic certifications and things like that. So anything that's improving the standards within the subsidiary industries around fashion, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's an organization called Remake as well. I think they're based in the UK, but they do a lot for human rights within the sustainability supply chain, or the fashion supply chain as well. But yeah, I agree.
Thank you all for sharing. Hi, Marshall.
Hi, I'm here to just wrap things up. Thank you guys all for sharing your insights and your stories. It was super interesting to listen to. And thank you to our audience for taking the time to listen to everyone's stories today. For all the questions we didn't get to, please do keep an eye out on the Green Story blog and channel. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. We'll also be sharing a summary blog and a replay link for anyone who wants to revisit the conversation. But just a huge thank you to everyone here today, especially our panelists and Lara for moderating this session. And I hope you guys have a wonderful Earth Day.
Yeah,
thank you, everyone, and thanks for
Happy
Happy Earth Day.
Thank
Ciao, ciao.
you.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.